We've been going to war on Twitter, and I hate having nuanced discussions on Twitter because you're limited to like 20 characters, and half the people are bots that just have bad takes, just like farm revenue. So I just let's just take a second. Let's have a video discussion about this. And I really just want to talk about, and I'm going to pull up some of my tweets and expand on them as well. But really the main point of this video is to dive into why I think when Bungie says they want Final Shape to be the same quality as the Taken King or Forsaken, I think that is an impossible task. And that's not necessarily due to like what I think the devs can do. I think if you look at it objectively, they'd be able to do it, but rather I think it's impossible because the community and a huge part of the community is so obsessed with like nostalgic content. And anytime you release something, you have to raise the bar so much more to even hit the same level as before. And so we're going to kind of go into that through a series of my tweets and, you know, just talk about it. So this really all started, Evan, great friend of mine, great guy. I'm not trying to dog on him or anything. I was just using this as an example. He tweeted out, the Witch Queen was not nearly on the same level as the Taken King and Forsaken. Which is definitely a take. Look, it's no secret. I think the Taken King is way overhyped. We'll talk about it here in this video, in fact. And please listen to the whole thing before you comment something dumb. I think Witch Queen was better than Taken King, just from like an objective quality of content standpoint. A lot of people like to point out quantity, but in my opinion, it does not matter the size of an expansion. It matters the kind of innovation an expansion has and like the obviously enjoyment level, but also different expansions are going to be tailored to different groups of people. We'll get into that more. Anyways, to this tweet, I replied, I quote tweeted, I personally don't think Taken King should be mentioned anywhere close to Forsaken in quality discussion. What it did was great for Destiny 1, but it's miles below Forsaken. But this example is literally why no matter what Bungie does, they are fighting an uphill battle. Nostalgia is king. And so like what I mean by that is just objective quality. If Forsaken never existed and we're on year 10 of Destiny, and in February Forsaken came out, people would still consider it, at least in my opinion, a pretty good DLC. But just in terms of like the core experience, the Tangled Shore campaign, the post campaign in the Dreaming City, the Last Wish raid, Shattered Throne might not be received well today because it's kind of easy now. But you bring all that stuff and you release it in February, I don't think it would be received that badly in this thought experiment. It'd probably be seen as like a little bit higher than Beyond Light, let's say. Now, if in February, let's say Taken King never happened, and you released everything that happened with the Taken King in February, that shit would get flamed harder than Shadowkeep. There was nothing really interesting in terms of today's mechanic standards in Taken King. The raid would be accepted very well, but the core campaign, no one would care. It's very short, not really that interesting. And people always like to bring out these huge charts like, oh, Taken King brought 4 strikes and 17 Crucible maps and 40 exotics or whatever. And it's like let's take a step back, okay? This is part, like the size of a DLC definitely helps, but Destiny DLCs are kind of like sex, right? Like it's not the size of the waves, it's the commotion of the ocean, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, yeah, sure, bigger DLC definitely could help, but it's how they implement that content. And there wasn't a lot of, in terms of today, there's not like a lot of innovation in Taken King. Back in Destiny 1, vanilla Destiny 1 sucked. So when Taken King came out, there was a lot of innovation. They were pushing it further and further and further. And that's what people are attached to, but that's what people, I believe, don't realize they're attached to. So they take all these positive feelings of this huge innovation and creativity burst into the game, and then they only associate that with pure numbers of stuff that came with the expansion. And to some of you guys, that might seem like common sense. Of course, it's the innovation, but believe me when I tell you, please believe me. That is not as common sense as you might think. And a lot of people, I have learned, especially on the internet, are incapable of that nuance and still have to learn how to do that nuance. So that's what this video is for. So you're not in love with the 20 exotics or the 40 exotics or whatever that came with the Taken King. Half of them were trash. And by Destiny 2 standards, right now, almost every exotic in Destiny 1 was utter garbage and would barely pass for a legendary weapon in today's world. Taken King brought 6 strikes. The new DLC needs to bring 6 strikes. It doesn't matter how many strikes a thing, you know, maybe like 2, freshen up a little bit, but no, not a single freaking soul is running the strike playlist. You know what I mean? Like, for GMs, they're cool. For the occasional bounty or weekly challenge or whatever that you have to run, fine. It's cool to have some more variety. But I guarantee if they bring 2 strikes or they bring 4, barely anyone's going to notice the difference in that. It's barely going to affect the daily gameplay of the average Destiny player. No one cares. That's just more of the same old, same old. For the time, for Taken King, that was great because strikes weren't ran into the ground. We've been running strikes for 10 years. They're not mechanically interesting. No matter what enemy type you're facing or where you're doing it, they play relatively the same. Shoot this thing, scan this thing, stand here, go. It's not that interesting. And I would personally much rather they take that development time and invest it into something that is mechanically innovative and more interesting. And once again, I think that's nuance. That's really lost on a lot of people. And so when I'm talking about quality discussions, I'm once again like taking that and framing it as how would it stand in the game today. Taken King and Forsaken are both really great for what they have done for innovation, once again, for Destiny. And so that's where Final Shape really needs to shine. But the problem is you have to, because the game has been iterated on and innovated on so many times, we have so many more systems now that didn't exist in vanilla Destiny 1 or even vanilla Destiny 2. Loadouts, triumphs, all the title systems. You have weapon crafting, you have like all of these insane layers just piled all on top of each other. Didn't used to exist. And so back then, the world was their oyster. They could make whatever they wanted. It was innovative. But now, so much of this stuff already exists that there's a much smaller window for innovation. And they have to be even more creative and they have to push it even further. And so that means to achieve the same level of innovation that occurred between Destiny 1 Vanilla and Taken King, they have to shoot for the stars because we're already not gonna, accept it as much because of these nostalgic feelings clouding our judgment. But also there's so little creativity and innovation left. And that's why live games are really hard. And that's why I do not envy game developers on this type of game. And I think another like really good example of this other tweet I pulled up, someone said, I miss Prison of Elders and Court of Oryx, man. And I tweet this, a little angry at this point, I apologize. I see this so much, but we literally have Ultra Court of Oryx in the game right now. Prison of Elders was also mid and will get flamed today if released. And that is, I stand by everything. Court of Oryx, at the time, kind of interesting. By today's standards, barely a public event. Let's just be real, guys, please. It was an artifact farm. That was like the only loot it gave you was an artifact. A thing that was useless. It doesn't even exist anymore, okay? It was to get your light up. It was like 3, there were obviously different levels, but there were like 3 main bosses. I think they rotated weekly or something. And the most mechanically interesting of them was like, you have to kill this guy next to that guy. But if you take Court of Oryx and you put it in the game right now, it would get so flamed. It would get destroyed. And I think a great example of that is Altars of Summoning. The seasonal activity from this season is literally the mega evolution form of Court of Oryx. It is the same thing, but 10 times bigger, with secrets thrown in there and the whole card system and way cooler lore. And, some people are liking it. I'm liking it a lot. I think it is genuinely a really interesting way to expand on like the seasonal event type of, or a seasonal activity model. I really like it. I think it's really cool. But just the discrepancies between that, like just objectively, they are pretty much the same thing. Altars of Summoning is 20 times bigger, gets 0% of the praise that Court of Oryx does. But people associate the nostalgia, like that innovation arc there, with just Court of Orcs just being like amazing, but it wasn't. At the time, it was a cool additional thing, and it was innovative compared to what we had. But by today's standards, it was nothing. And I think the same thing goes for Black Armory Forges. I don't want to go too much into it. I had another tweet. I'm sort of tired of people acting like Black Armory Forges weren't the most boring shit ever. You bring that shit today, back today, and Bungie would be crucified, literally worse than Expeditions. And look, you don't have to go any further than the Solstice event for this. Bonfire Bash is literally like exactly the same as Black Armory Forges. The activity. We're not talking about the lore. We're not talking about the secrets hidden within that season. We're talking Forges. And the Solstice activity is the same, but even more rewarding, because every time you complete it, you get 3 guns, and you had to complete 2 Forges to get a single gun to focus. And so it's just, and people hate Bonfire Bash. And that's just another example of what I'm talking about. So this is a very, very, very difficult battle for Bungie, where they have to combat nostalgia and the limited amount of innovation that, you know, remains. And they have to really push creatively to have a jump in systems and experiences that we haven't really experienced before, while maintaining a good amount of quality and delivering that across a girth of activities, and trying to get like a good amount of quantity out there as well. And so I guess just kind of to wrap up, nice little analogy. Everyone likes sex. Most people like sex. Not the size of the ocean, it's the motion of the waves. You know, I think you could think of Taken King kind of like the missionary position. Up to that point, everyone was like doggy styling it. Someone came along and was like, here's a slight innovation. It's a little bit more intimate, you know, it's like, it's a different experience. People get excited by that. So boom, Taken King. Forsaken, kind of like Cowgirl, you know what I mean? Better views, I would say better for endgame players. Nice, but now they're running out. What comes next? And you can't push it too far because people get too taboo about sex stuff and video game stuff. And so Bungie has to make the new sex position, is essentially what I'm saying. And sex is coming to Destiny 2 in the final shape. Let me know your thoughts down below. Sorry for this rambly video. It's just hard to really have these discussions on Twitter. And if you enjoyed, consider subscribing. I'll see you guys very soon.